We're now recording. So it's my great pleasure to introduce John Torday as the final speaker of this meeting. And John is going to talk about, it's called Unus Mundus, and he will tell us more about that. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, despite the Atlantic Ocean? Cool. Okay. So I actually modified the title, and I'm actually going to ultimately address Godel's incompleteness theorem, or my solution to it. So I'm sort of setting things up here. Let's see, how do I get to the next slide? Okay. So my speculation is that the following is the solution for the Godel incompleteness theorem, but you be the judge of that. Thank you. Okay. Understanding consciousness is the most important thing we need. So I'm getting blocked out here. Sorry. Oops. Yeah, there's a bubble. Pardon?
You want a slide before this one?
No, he said he was skipping some stuff.
Oh, okay. Okay.
No, it's there. It's just being blocked by this bubble for some reason. Let's see. I can't get rid of it. Okay, so I'll tolerate it somehow. Yeah. Okay, so consciousness is the most important thing we need to understand. And in conventional terms, it's referred to as the explanatory gap, that is the gap between brain and mind. But I will demonstrate that consciousness is distributed through physiology. The evolution of physiology has been traced back to the unicell using cell communication, a publication of ours back in 2012. And the mechanism of evolution, as I claimed in that article, was symbiogenesis. It's the assimilation of factors in the environment. That's Lynn Margulis's hypothesis and now theory, published first in 1967. By the way, Margulis was Carl Sagan's wife at that time. This is a constructive process in deference to a destructive process. So the question is, why construction? As a consequence, physiology operates in based on the same laws of nature as the cosmos. Consciousness is our awareness of the cosmological laws of nature, and this is why we feel that there is something greater than ourselves. So here's a schematic. I'm saying that in the beginning of Earth's history, there were lipids floating in water on the surface of the Earth. The poets always beat us to the punch. So, for example, Robert Frost said that life is that which can mix oil and water, which to a physical chemist would be nonsense, but to a poet, it works. And I'll try and convince you that that's true. So there were these snowball asteroids that struck the surface of the atmosphereless Earth, and they came from pulsars. As these snowballs that contain both water and lipids, polycyclic hydrocarbons. And that and the fusion of, or the formation of micelles from lipids was the demarcation between Bohm's implicate and explicate orders, which I'm showing on the right in his book, Wholeness and the Implicate Order. So schematically, what I'm showing is the surface of the water. You have these lipids, which are referred to in lipid chemistry as amphiphiles. They have positive and negative charges on them at either pole. And for that reason, they orient with the lipid soluble end of the lipid molecule downward into the water, and the positively charged end pointing upwards. And that's facilitated by Earth's gravity. So there's a phase transition that occurs once you pack enough of these lipids together, because the negative charges neutralize the van der Waals force of surface tension of the water. And so what you get is a phase transition to form this micelle. It's this structure that I'm showing here as a dotted line surrounding a circle, if you will. So basically the lipids go from molecules to this structure. And so there's a quantum leap, literally, that occurs here. And that's the connection between our existence and that of the cosmos through quantum mechanics. And the cell, as it evolves, follows three first principles of physiology, as I've published it. There's negative entropy, chemiosmosis as the mechanism at the time that I could address as the energy to provide the horsepower for the negative entropic state. And then that's all controlled by homeostasis. And homeostasis is critical for what I'm about to talk about. It's basically the fundament of everything. Okay, so here's a more complicated diagram, and I've numbered it. So we have gravitational force causing this formation of the micelle. I've attributed the relationship between the symbiogenic process that Margulis came up with quantum entanglement in a recent publication this year. And the reason that I postulated that quantum mechanics or quantum entanglement was the origin of symbiogenesis is because, like symbiogenesis, quantum entanglement also maintains homeostasis. So that's step 2 and 3. And now I'm going back here. I'm citing these first principles of physiology as the reference point, ultimately for the cell. And furthermore, as I showed in a paper published back in 2003, if you put differentiated cells into zero gravity using a device that NASA sponsored years ago, the cell will lose its phenotypic identity. It will lose its evolutionary history. And if you put the cell back into unit gravity, it will reestablish that phenotypic history. So it's a reversible process. So evolution is being driven literally by the gravitational force that initiated life in the first place. So that's step 4 over here on the far right. So another way to look at this, we know that as the lung evolved, if you look at the schematic on the left, you start with the swim bladder of a fish, which basically uses gases, oxygen particularly, to regulate buoyancy in water. And that structure is now known through cell molecular biology, in contradistinction to the conventional way of thinking about the evolution of lung, which was from the gill. That was an analogy, not a homology, in the sense that it was of the same origin. So if you look at that diagram, you're going from the swim bladder of the fish at the lower left to that of the amphibian as you go from water to land, temporarily at any rate, to reptilians and mammalians. And that process is underpinned by the utilization of these pink cells. These are smooth muscle cells, which then are co-opted to form the wall of the alveolus as it gets smaller and smaller. And in order to achieve that, in order to go from a larger to a smaller surface area of the alveolus, you have to produce what's called lung surfactant, which reduces the surface tension caused based upon the law of Laplace that would otherwise not allow this process to occur. So on the right, I show the Cartesian coordinate alveolarization versus time. And I'm saying that Einstein's energy mass relationship actually is the basis for this process of lung evolution in particular. So I'm showing that stepwise, what happens is that energy is being facilitated by the evolution of the lung providing oxygen for metabolic evolution. So in reality, when I as an embryologist look at this process, what's actually happening is it's not per se the transition from the fertilized egg to 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells. That's description. What it actually constitutes is a series of high energy phosphate exchanges. So it's all about energy, not matter. And the way in which this is all occurring, as I indicated in the lower left, is by cell-cell interactions. Okay. And the origin for the Cartesian coordinates on the right is the Big Bang. So man, or I'm talking about man as the cell, or the origin of man, is the measure of all things. That was Protagoras back in ancient Greece. There was no explicate or implicate order bone before life began. The cell as a topology, partitioning the explicate and implicate orders, defining the interface between the outside and inside of the cell. Therefore, math and physics are superseded by biology, unlike Rutherford's put down of biology as all sciences, either physics or stamp collecting. I'm going to try and disabuse you of that idea. Husserl's The Origin of Geometry article, published in 1936, says the same thing about mathematics being external to biology. Similarly, Wheeler's meaning circuit, John Wheeler's meaning circuit hypothesis, and Mario Livio's golden ratio book published in 2016 similarly speculate that mathematics is innate to us. So another way to look at this is, if you look on the far left, I'm saying that you have this effect of gravity on quantum entanglement, which in turn gave rise to symbiogenesis, which I'm showing here. If you look at the top row, these X's and Y's, this is a schematic for symbiogenesis. And that, in fact, is the way in which we have evolved the Bohm's explicate order of physiology. Okay. And I'm trying to intimate here that actually originated from cosmic gravity as a non-local consciousness mechanism. So looking at the Big Bang some 13.7 billion years ago, we have at the left a schematic depiction of that event, which was a singularity, or the Unus, or Carl Jung's Unus Mundus. That generated a vector with an origin, and then the vector then has proceeded on with over the course of time, and we in turn have evolved to adapt to that cosmic or the expansion of the cosmos. So another way to think about that is as a lattice work. So, for example, stellar nucleosynthesis or stellar evolution, stars generate light, and as a byproduct of light, they produce at least the first 36 atoms or elements. From hydrogen to iron in the exact same sequence as their atomic number. So that provides a lattice work which, through symbiogenesis, we have internalized. And so, for example, there's a gap between iron, atomic number 36, and atomic number 53, iodine. However, because biology has memory, so lipids actually have, they exhibit hysteresis, is the molecular memory of biology. That memory allowed biology to remember this process by which it internalized symbiogenically these atomic or these elements. And so the thyroid evolved of mammals evolved from the endostyle of lampreys, of invertebrate organisms, to form the thyroid and allow for the utilization of iodine to generate thyroxine. So the lattice work of the cosmos through stellar nucleosynthesis is what provides this information to biology. There is a school of thought similarly that gravity is the origin of how the particulates after the Big Bang formed planets. So now you have a common mechanism for both planetary evolution and the biology that exists on the surface of the planet as well. So there's a common mechanism for both. So again, I'm schematizing into symbiosis at the top, going from X to XY to XYZ, etc. And I'm saying that the first step in the evolution of consciousness, if you look at the bottom description, was the first step was binary. That is, the cell membrane is a semi-permeable membrane governing what substances would enter and exit the cell. And then those factors that are internalized, the XY and XYZ schematic, is analog. And that actually is what provides the basis for physiology through this cell-cell communication mechanism. But there's a connection between local consciousness on the left and cosmic consciousness through the mechanism that I'm alluding to. Evolution is non-commutative because it complies with terminal addition, adding newly evolved traits onto the end of an evolved trait, not the middle or beginning, which would result in extinction, largely because it would just take too much time, and in the time course of not doing practicing terminal addition, the animal would become extinct. Because evolution is a function of cell-cell communication, it is inefficient to add a newly evolved trait in the middle or the beginning of an evolved trait. Therefore, newly acquired traits are only added at the end of evolved traits, or what is commonly described in biology as terminal addition. The form of evolution being described in this inverse of random mutation based upon Darwinian evolution is striking to me anyway. And I firmly believe that random mutation is a one-off. It's not the basic process by which evolution has occurred. Conversely, evolution is determined by its context within the environment, striving to reestablish homeostasis. So in other words, the expansion of the cosmos gives rise to the ever-changing environment, and the organism life has evolved to maintain homeostasis over the course of that ongoing process. Operationally, if evolution were random, it would not have been possible to trace the stepwise cellular molecular emergences that constitute vertebrate evolution, as I've stipulated in the publications, in tens of papers that I've published, as well as 10 books now. Contrary to Darwin, evolution is both probabilistic and deterministic in service to homeostasis, providing a mechanism for Maturana and Varela's autopoiesis, a book they published in 1982, in which they described autopoiesis as self-referential and self-organizational, but they didn't provide a mechanism. They just described the process. So experimental evidence for non-local gravity superseding local gravity. The phase transition from lipids to micelles is a quantum leap, as I said in an earlier slide. Zero gravity causes cells to lose their phenotypic identity in vitro and in vivo, as I will cite later. And this is probably why Krishnamurti, in the dialogues that he had with Bohm, in a late dialogue in 1982, said to Bohm that you have to lose your ego to connect with the cosmic consciousness state. The ego is the material state of being. The cosmic consciousness is, again, this quantum level of being, if you will. So loss of cell-cell signaling during aging and senescence leads to the loss of physiologic identity, no ego. Major, in 2013, published a series of a study of patients clinically who were recovering from general anesthesia, showing that that process recapitulates brain phylogeny. Kubler-Ross, for example, in her classic book on death and dying, published in 1969, showed that NDEs are associated with seeing a point of light, and that transition to the non-local is cosmic consciousness. So is the above, can the above be seen as a return to the singularity, or Unus Mundus? So the body is the memory of this, as the synthesis of evolution as cell-cell communication. The body can remember trauma, for example, and that's been shown in many studies. It answers the David Chalmers' philosophical question as to what the hard question is. He says the easy question has been answered. These are obvious, but the hard question is seeing red when injured, for example. So if you whack your thumb with a hammer, why do you see red? And I'm saying this is innate. It's referring back to when we first had a closed circulatory system and had the nervous system to feel pain. So this is evidence that the cell can remember. Documented receptor gene duplications and amplifications during the water-land transition. For example, parathyroid hormone-related protein receptor, the beta-adrenergic receptor, and glucocorticoid receptor. These are all hormone receptors, and they all duplicated during the water-to-land transition, and they were due to positive selection for adaptation to land. So, for example, PTHRP, which I studied under NIH granting auspices for 30 years, is an amplification that caused the calcification of the skeleton to support increased effective weight on land versus water. So the effective gravitational force is increased from buoyancy in water to the effective gravity on land. Mathematics of the cell membrane is, in my opinion, a Mobius strip. If there is an Unus Mundus, one would expect there to be mathematics that is consistent with that. So here I'm showing schematically at the top So the title of the slide is Homology between the Fibonacci sequence and cellular evolution. So I'm showing the evolutionary process at the cell level, starting with a naive cell, a micelle, if you will, at the far left. And then over the course of time, you have symbiogenesis increasing the stuff that's in the cell. That's evolution. And the way that that's occurring is through referencing earlier steps in the evolution of the organism, referring back to the first principles of physiology. So there is this self-referential, self-organizational autopoietic mechanism that Maturana and Varela made famous, actually. And below that, I'm showing the Fibonacci sequence, which basically does the same thing. You're going from 0 to, I'm showing only the first 144 elements of the Fibonacci sequence, but it comes about, as I'm sure you all know, through the addition of the previous two numbers. So 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 2 is 3, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm maintaining that, that these are both basically homologies. They're both maintaining homeostasis, and they're both, again, this self-referential, self-organizing mechanism. And in fact, I'm of the opinion that the cellular evolution occurred in order to perceive the Fibonacci sequence. This is the evolution actually of consciousness, if you will. So we are conscious of the Fibonacci sequence because it's innate, internal to us. If there is an Unus Mundus continuum from the Big Bang to the present, it would predict a mathematics consistent with that process. So again, I'm saying that the Fibonacci sequence is at least one mathematical expression of that. Similarly, Da Vinci expressed the Vitruvian man, depicted, delineated by the circle surrounding him, and that in turn I'm showing as a superposition of this spiral form of the chambered nautilus, for example. There are many, many examples of the golden ratio in architecture, in art, in music, on history, you name it. So the question is, why is there this close approximation of our consciousness by the Fibonacci sequence? So here I'm showing schematically that the origin of local and non-local consciousness are interrelated. So if you start in the middle with gravity inducing energy, so based on Einstein's field theory, you have a force impinging on a curved surface, generating the energy necessary for the non-locality of consciousness as quantum entanglement, which, if you look to the left, evolved from, gave rise to symbiogenesis as our local consciousness. And so, as Bohm has said, our subjective senses evolved from the implicate order to the explicate order, and this is actually a corollary of that, or basically understanding the mechanism behind that. And if you look to the right, the non-local of quantum entanglement references the cosmologic gravity, and that's what I cite in this paper to the lower right, published in 2023, entitled Consciousness Embodied Quantum Entanglement. Okay. So the connection of self to the cosmos is a two-tiered system, as I alluded to before, but I think that's an important idea. So the first tier of awareness is the cell membrane, which allows particles to move in and out of the cell through the semi-permeable membrane. And that's a binary, a yes or no kind of thing. But that in turn gives rise to factors in the cell which have evolved to form our physiology through cell-cell communication. And so you have this continuum from the non-local cosmic gravity to the local effective gravity through the quantum entanglement mechanism, giving rise to, I'm sorry, on the right, I'm talking about the two-tiered system here. The second tier is the analog system, which gives rise to physiologic evolution through cell-cell communication. So Carl Jung maintained that the world of alchemical symbols does not belong to the rubbish heap of the past, but stands in a very real and living relationship to our most recent discoveries concerning the psychology of the unconscious. The recent publication, my publication, which is cited just in the previous slide, of the relationship of consciousness to the quantum entanglement mechanism, connects the non-local of consciousness of quantum entanglement to the local consciousness of classic Newtonian physics. The premise is that since both symbiogenesis, the process of assimilating factors in the environment that have posed existential threats to form our physiology is in service to maintaining the homeostasis locally, on the one hand, and quantum entanglement, the ability to maintain the interrelationship of particles between local and non-local homeostatically, on the other. Then, hypothetically, quantum entanglement evolved into symbiogenesis. So just to briefly go over that consciousness paper, so the background was that if you take lung and or bone cells, which are stretch sensitive, so if you distend them, they actually upregulate, they stimulate PTHRP, mRNA, and protein expression. We showed that experimentally years ago. Their physiologic evolution, structure, and function are contingent on that property. So the hypothesis I tested was that in zero gravity, lung and bone cells lose their phenotypically evolved traits reversibly. So if you put the cells in zero gravity, they lose their phenotypic identity. But then if you put them back in unit gravity, the cells will regain their evolved traits within about 24 hours. So the method was to use this rotating wall vessel in which you take cells and you adhere them to these Cephidex beads, which have a certain buoyancy. So if you put the beads in culture medium into the rotating wall vessel and you centrifuge it, basically emulate free fall, which is virtual zero gravity. It's not exactly zero gravity, but it's close enough for this kind of thing. So what we measured was mRNA for PTHRP and for the protein. So the mRNA was measured independently of the tagging of the PTHRP protein using green fluorescent protein as a label, measuring the expression, the amount of PTHRP that was being produced over the course of this 0G versus 1G experiment. So these are the data for the experiment. So if we look at the far left, you have the normal state of the PTHRP expression in both for mRNA and protein. And then as you go over time, you lose the PTHRP expression over about 12-hour period. The PTHRP forms a new baseline, which is almost at zero here for the protein, not quite for the mRNA. And then if you put the cells back into unit gravity, they recover within about 24 hours. So in other words, the cells were not being damaged. They were actually responding to this zero gravity experience. So the conclusion was that in zero gravity, cells lose their evolved traits. This phenomena has been reproduced both by a group at Boston University, cited in number 1 by this group, Periv, Dorj, Gage et al., using yeast, and also by Cameron, Goldsman, etc., in Montreal, showing that the role of parathyroid hormone-related protein in osteoblast response to microgravity is a mechanistic implication for osteoporosis development, as is well known in astronauts. So that was published in 2016. So how to explain the state of the cell in zero gravity, given that gravity is necessary for the initiation of cell formation? So Klassen and Spooner showed in a publication in 1996 that the liposomes, these micelles that I described, they don't form normally under microgravity. They're heterogeneous, which doesn't lend itself to the evolution of the cell. And I won't go into delve into that, but suffice it to say that that's true. So if consciousness is the aggregate of physiology, the functional linking of local and non-local consciousness exhibited by the effect of zero gravity connects local and non-local, or conscious and unconscious, through the force of gravity, as I described in another 2023 publication. So this is experimental evidence for, in my opinion, for Jung's connection between the alchemical and the collective unconscious. So again, the cell membrane has evolved acting like a Mobius strip, or so I'm claiming, forming a conduit between the inside of the cell and the cosmos. And the reason that I think that the membrane it's a functional Mobius strip, not a literal Mobius strip. As you conventionally think about a ribbon of paper, you twist it, you attach the ends, and now you have no inside or outside. No, it's because the cell remembers when it wasn't a cell. It's the memory. So it remembers the individual lipid molecules before you had a cell membrane. So the homology between Fibonacci series and cellular evolution is shown again here. The cell evolution, as I described earlier, allowing for the recognition of the Fibonacci series. So in other words, the cell evolution represents the evolution of consciousness, which allows for us to understand, to recognize the Fibonacci sequence. This convergence of evolution in mathematics is a paradigm shift, in my opinion. So here, the recognition. So how and why did this occur? So the recognition that both processes maintain homeostasis in an expanding cosmos would potentially explain this convergence of evolution from cell evolution to the Fibonacci sequence. So here I'm showing the intermediate. So between physiologic evolution and the aggregate of that being consciousness or logic, as described by Mario Livio in his book on the golden ratio, published in 2016, for example. And that in turn allows us to contemplate, to recognize the logic of the Fibonacci series, not the other way around. So my prediction is that consciousness acts as both observer and observed. It's not one or the other. We are a cipher. And it's missing, and the missing factor in it's the missing factor in Gödel's incompleteness theorem. So paraphrasing Gödel backed into consciousness by deconstructing mathematics. And so a corollary to that would be that incorporating consciousness, both local and non-local, into Gödel would complete it. Thank you.
Thanks, John. All right, can I ask for questions from the from here, from Zoom. Yeah. Zoom.
Can I just, Peter, I did put a couple of questions I posed a question to Andrew and a question to Albrecht related to Andrew's work on fonts and to Albrecht's comments about the difference between Einstein and Lorentz, and that I may be explaining those phenomena. So, sorry, just wanted to mention that.
Do Albrecht or Andrew want to reply to that?
I think the idea that the cell is the measure of all things is extremely interesting and seems very widely applicable. And reminds me very much of Spencer Brown seeing things in terms of distinctions as opposed to aggregates and atoms with qualities, with properties that emerge. So from that point of view, I think it's a hugely interesting approach. Whether I believe the stuff about Fibonacci series and all that, I say I have my doubts. But that the cell recapitulates its form throughout the whole history of the Earth seems to me a very beautiful idea.
Thank you. So, yeah, I wanted to say that. No, go ahead. I'm sorry, Albrecht. Did you want
Albrecht, would you like to say anything? Albrecht, would you like to say anything? He asked you if you would like to reply to his question.
Yeah, which question? I didn't.
Well, can you repeat the question to you? Can you repeat the question, John?
Sure. So, Albrecht, in your beautiful presentation, you said that Einstein and Lorentz differed in their opinions and their mathematics because Einstein was a follower of Plato and Lorentz was a follower of Copernicus. So what I'm suggesting is that subjective difference in their logics, that is Einstein versus Lorentz, gave rise to the differences in the mathematics.
Einstein's relativity is based on principles, and there he follows Plato, because the opinion of Plato was about the world, that the world is built by structures. And these structures, that's my position to it, can be described very comfortably by principles. So Einstein was very happy when he found that he could develop a theory, the theory of relativity, on principles, and so that one could see structures, the structure of space and the structure of time. These both are not, what I say, not physical entities, but concepts or structure entities. He has made a mathematical system out of structures, and that was conformed to his education. Whereas Lorentz, I think, did not follow Copernicus. He did follow Newton at the end. He knew, of course, he has taken physical informations which have been developed after Newton, so like Maxwell about electromagnetism and so on. But it's more the thinking of Newton that we have matter, and the matter is controlled by physical laws. That is what Lorentz thinks, and in which way Lorentz has built his way of relativity. They are built on knowledge, on existing knowledge about the physics. Lorentz did not have really to invent new things, where Einstein has invented a new structure for his picture of relativity. Is this an answer to you?
Somewhat. I mean, what I'm saying is that Gödel's incompleteness theorem is correct, because what he basically inadvertently factored out the mathematics, and there was something missing from the understanding, the logic, and I'm maintaining that that's the observer. He ended up with the residual of his reduction was consciousness. So what I'm suggesting is that Einstein and Lorentz had somewhat differed in their logic, and as a result, the logic gave rise to differences in the mathematics.
I do not see it in the way that both had different logic, but they had a different system. Einstein has an abstract mathematical system, and Lorentz has a system which is related to the known physical laws, but the mathematics is not different. Okay, Einstein needed the four-dimensional system. Lorentz doesn't need it. That is a difference regarding mathematics. But you can, I think, if a mathematician would say, to calculate with 3 dimension or 4 dimension is not such a fundamental difference. It's both basically the same kind of mathematics, and they use both the same kind of mathematics. That's what I feel.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going more with the Plato versus Copernicus thing. Sorry.
So, Mike Horner's got a question, but Lou wants to make a quick comment.
Yeah.
Continue with
I
Godel.
want to make a comment, John, to show you that in a certain sense I agree with you about Godel. Let me explain. Godel's theorem is correct, that if you take a formal system which amounts to a set of rules that are going to be followed slavishly, exactly those rules, and you try to make it consistent and contain arithmetic, then there will be theorems in that system which cannot be proved in that system that are nevertheless true. And the truth arises out of the interaction of consciousness with that system. Because in order to prove Gödel's theorem, you have to have a conscious mathematical person who is proving the theorem about the formal system. And that person, between that person's consciousness and the formal system, arise truths which cannot be proved within the system, and that person can prove that there are truths that are not within the system. In the larger system, consisting of the person's consciousness and the original formal system, that incompleteness is resolved. But then it can be made up all over again by making a formal system that acts like the person and the formal system. So we never escape from the basic part of it, which says that if you separate consciousness and make a strictly machine-like entity, it will be incomplete. But I think that this is just another way of stating what you said.
Yeah, I agree. So I guess I can address it in terms of AI. I don't think that it'll always be artificial. It will never be general intelligence, because you cannot program the system. You cannot create a mathematical algorithm that's going to address the history of humankind, of the individual, if you will. At least that's my sense. That's the take home for me.
So, Mike, you've got a question?
Hello, John. This is Mike Horner. Sorry, there's no picture. For the audience, some years ago, John Torday and I worked together, and I tried to persuade him to include the concept of information in his thinking, and introduced him to biosemiotics and so on. And I see today that I completely and utterly failed. In my opinion, John, had you gone down a slightly different route, in fact, I should say a dramatically different route, then the way that you treat memory and the way you treat evolution would be completely different, and you wouldn't have to jump through all of the hoops that you've done to actually provide what you might call a materialist solution. Nevertheless, I really enjoyed to hear your latest stuff. As a final tiny comment, one of the greats of ANPA is David McGovern, and he has written and thought about Godel, and there's now a recent book which is mentioned in the proceedings. If you have any trouble getting to it, it's well worth reading, although it's rather complicated. But thank you, Lou. That's a very coherent thing as far as I'm concerned.
So, Mike, I didn't mean to ignore what you told me, but my problem as a biologist is the one mechanism in biology we know that gives rise to structure and function is embryology. And embryology is a series of energy exchanges, and I am of the opinion that it's not matter, it's energy. So I understand information theory, Shannon, but I don't think it's the basis for our existence. I think the basis for our existence is energy exchanges and homeostasis. Okay.
Let me make one more attempt.
Sure.
Several years later, going off of what Andrew said with the idea of a cell, you downplayed Maturam and Varela. Their book and their invention was really about two things: cognition, if you like, consciousness, and the physical cell. So in the model, the energy has got two faces, one of which is matter and the other one is information. Then all of the things you're talking about is truly energy, but it's guided by information, which is part of the memory of the individual, part of the memory of the whole idea of cells on planet Earth, and possibly other things. But it does give an entirely different slant on how a cell evolves and how individuals have memories and where consciousness comes from. I'm preaching what I was preaching a few months ago whenever we work together. But as I say, thank you very much for your presentation.
I just rebut and say that, again, in embryology, I did this work for 50 years as a laboratory person, okay? So the key to understanding how cells grow and differentiate is these soluble growth factors that were discovered by Stanley Cohen, for example, who won the Nobel for his work. Those growth factors, they have no information. It's only the cell that is informed, if you will. But
in your scheme, John,
yeah.
Right at the beginning,
Yeah.
you do not include information. Therefore, you cannot give that explanation in any other way. By the way, I was talking to Albrecht and I asked him, where do you come from in the sort of big picture? And he absolutely admitted his entire way of thinking is to do with matter and physics as far as he's concerned. So I couldn't have a discussion with him, and it reminded me of our discussion which went nowhere several years ago. I think we should stop it, otherwise we're wasting people's time. I see Mark Johnson speaking. That's great. Peter, give him the nod.
Is it relevant to this, or is it another question, Mark?
I was before mine,
Oh, because Nicola's been waiting to ask the question.
but I don't mind.
If it's relevant...
No, Nicola, sorry, I don't want to disrupt the order, no.
Okay, well, we'll go with Nicola, then we'll go with...
I'm not that fussed. Because mine is kind of like, is sideways. Yeah. So, in terms of cell membrane, I just wanted to tell you, John, that when I did a biochemistry A-level as part of my craniosacral training, I wrote a eulogy about the cell membrane because it is so beautiful and so complex and so wonderful. I've been wondering recently, and I'm just thinking about, you were talking about consciousness as observer and observed. I've been wondering recently what it's like to incarnate as a planet and what it would be like to incarnate as a cell. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I think there's a fundamental difference between the inanimate and the animate in terms of the inanimate is a stable, creates stability through chemical reactions, whereas that's the death knell for biology, for the animate. So you're always in a state of flux between the deterministic and the probabilistic, and have to be aware of your environment in order to maintain equipoise, homeostatic energy state, which is not the case for the inanimate. That's stability. So I guess that's my simple answer to your question.
Well, you don't think that Gaia is animate? Is that what you're saying?
Not. It's.
She?
Yeah, right. No. I understand what you're saying, but I'm saying that it's the ability of the animate to absorb, to integrate the inanimate, that is the key to Gaia. So in other words, I don't think the planet itself is living. I think the organisms in it and on it are living.
Oh dear.
Well, I think we can do that. Mark, you've got a question. Mark?
Yes, thank you. Sorry. Okay, so I suppose I wonder if the discussion that's happening, which is extremely interesting, is about abstraction and about whether it is ever possible for us to escape abstraction. And I suppose one way in which that might be possible is in things like music and the arts. I think attempts to formalize inevitably take us back to Godel. And I suppose I'm saying again what Lou said. As soon as you've got a formal system, you've got incompleteness. So it's almost as if science is always caught in a trap. That as much as it tries to abstract and schematize and formalize, as soon as it does it, we miss ourselves in some way. The only question I've got at the back of my mind as to whether this is correct, I think so much about Peter's work, and particularly the stuff, the sort of Clifford algebra related stuff, whether some of that trap is to do with the fact that we conflate different dimensions, that actually understanding and being clear about the dimensionality of our concepts is a way of getting around this. I just don't know. I'd be interested to know what people think.
Lou's got a...
Let me make a comment about it. If you regard yourself as always free to make more formalism, just like as a composer of music, you allow yourself to write more music or make up new notations for music, then the Godelian trap disappears.
Yes, you're right. Yes, that's right. And is it the same if you create new formalisms? So if you create new formalisms as a mathematician, so if you're creating new algebras or new ways of manipulating dimensions, is that the same?
Well, new rules. So formalism is some set of rules that you happen to like. So maybe you've been writing your music in 18th century mode for all your life, and suddenly you realize that you could shift to a different mode that you invented, or a jazz mode, or something else. You're allowed. Why wouldn't you be allowed? Why wouldn't you be allowed to make up your own rules? What we do characteristically as human beings is make up some rules and then follow them. But then we fall into the trap that we're supposed to always follow the very rules and no other rules. Why should we fall into that trap?
Yes, quite. No, I've always enjoyed breaking the rules, and there is something really fundamental about that. And I mean, this goes back to an argument really that John and I have had for a long time about the difference between science and art, and I've always felt that in so many ways they're not doing exactly the same thing, but they are both required. They are both necessary. I don't know if I can say any more about that.
One thing that happens in science is that we set up some rules, like Newton's laws or Schrödinger's equation or whatever, and then we try to follow it as far as we can until it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
We know it's not going to work after a while, and we're hoping.
Yeah.
We're hoping to find out where it doesn't work.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Going to bring in Nicola here.
Yeah. In my talk, Mark, I was talking about Vedic measure, and I was talking about musical measure, and how these are different from our normal measure, which is linear measure, which comes from vision. It comes from vision in a very specific relation to touch, so to matter as we experience it in normal 3D. So, and the tendency there is to go into the world of I-it, the Weberian world of I-it, which makes everything it, and then its abstractions, and you can get lost. Whereas musical measure and the Vedic measures, which relate to the other senses, are actually the possibility of other kinds of ways of being in the world. And I think that's, why you say, oh, well, maybe we discover it through music. And that's it. We are not just, walking heads. We are embodied beings. We incarnate, we become flesh, and we have these amazing different senses. And in my view, the way that I am interested in developing mathematics, one way anyway, is particularly in terms of what are these? Is there a way of being and thinking in these different senses, which bring about different languages, and how, if we just take these 5, how can we bring these together? And I think this, and I think this is actually a living. This is it's a way of living. It's a way of living and going on living in ourselves and with others.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
I rest my case.
Over to John.
At the risk of being obnoxious, back to my corner. I cannot explain my zero gravity experiment based on information. The deprivation of energy, the gravitational energy, is what causes the loss of information, not the other way around. So again, I'd like you to comment, but I think that speaks volumes about the hierarchical order of things.
It would be impossible, John, to reply between now and when they have to close up the library. But I will make another effort 5 years later to persuade you that your idea of information is using the same word but is not the same concept at all.
Okay. All right, well, that's fair enough.
And I'd just like to say that I thought that was really interesting. I did not know that, well, first of all, that the phenotype would be lost in zero gravity, and more important, would come back when gravity is returned. That just sort of doing, that's really very interesting. So thank you. Well, thank you for a lot of your talk anyway.
Well, Nicola, just back to you seem to be flummoxed by my saying that that the planet is not alive. I think it's an anthropocentric way of thinking to think that the planet is alive because we've internalized it. We've internalized the cosmos. That's the key to consciousness.
Yeah.
So that's where that...
I think it's a mechanicomorphic way of thinking to think that she's not conscious, but that's another conversation. We can have more conversations too.
Well, see, for me, the critical question is, I think it's a truism that we all feel that there's something greater than ourselves. That's why I didn't put on a cleric's, garb. I'm a scientist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're all seeking an answer to that question, in my opinion. And I do think that the answer to that question is that symbiogenic mechanism that Margulis came up with many, many years ago. She was a professor of mine as an undergraduate, actually. So anyway, yeah.
John, it's a pity that you didn't have access to the earlier talks. There were several references to Teilhard de Chardin, whose image, which guides all of the way he thinks about stuff, is first of all that reality has multiple levels, which our normal one doesn't have, and that the entire thing is alive. So in that model, it's not even worth asking the question whether the Earth is alive. By definition, it is. So that's the sort of difference in scope that we're talking about here. I think we should stop because there's supposed to be a little discussion.
Yeah, can I just leave a final comment?
One more comment. I would like to suggest that the feeling that there's something greater than ourselves is exactly analogous to the Godel theorem. But the Godel theorem is exactly that when we feel there's something greater than ourselves, what we're saying to ourselves is that whatever description we have produced for ourselves is not quite all. Because it's at the level of description, and there's something beyond that.
Yeah. But I'm saying the mechanism underlying that is symbiogenesis.
Can I now say thank you to the speaker and all the people who contributed to it. We want to switch off this recording, and for the moment, just a moment, let's switch it off.